Welcome to On Work and Revolution, where we talk about what's shaking up in the world of work right now and how we can make work life suck less. For those of you who know me, and most of you do, you know that I'm aiming for amazing work life, but on some days, suck less can be just fine. Today, we have as our guest, Advaita Naidoo, who many of you know as well. And I'd love to do, my favorite thing on podcasts is actually doing introductions. So Advaita is the MD Africa for Jackhammer Global. As you know, Jackhammer is a global group of executive search and leadership coaching companies. A little bit about her background. Some of you may not know this. She comes from a very illustrious background in academia. She has a master's in psychological research. She's spent time at the Human Sciences Research Council and then traveled all over the world working 4 continents and ended up at an executive recruiting company somewhere. And then when she decided to come back to South Africa, she interviewed with us here at Jackhammer. She chose Jackhammer. There's a little bit of a backstory to that. And started as a researcher, became Chief Operating Officer, and is now MD Africa for our Africa business. So welcome, Advaita. Oh, the part that's absolutely critical to mention, she is also mom to 3 boys, which under the age of 9, which I realize I probably wouldn't be mentioning if it was like a guy on the panel, right? We don't always talk about, well, he's a father to 4 kids. But it is particularly relevant for this conversation because we're talking about creating amazing workplaces for working moms. Okay, enough from me. Advaita, our origin story, where you had interviewed with Jackhammer, and I knew instantly, I just knew that I wanted to hire you. And so I moved quickly, sent an offer through. You seemed like really excited and enthusiastic. And I was like, this is a done deal. And then it was silence. What was going on?
For anyone who hasn't heard the story yet, I'm going to share our superhero origin story. So when I met you about 9 years ago, I'd also met with a couple of other companies. And then Nalen, who was the person who naughtily was not on mute just now, he and I went back to Singapore, and that's where we lived at the time. And you know, I think everybody already knows this punchline, but let me just do a little dramatic effect here. Dum, 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 I found out I was pregnant. And as it happens, another company had also made me an offer at the same time. So I let you know I was pregnant. I let the other MD know, and he retracted his offer. And I got that party line. Feel free to get in touch after you have the baby. We'll keep the door open, etc., etc. Whereas you said these exact words to me, and I always quote this verbatim because this was a watershed moment in my life. You said, "So what? Start sooner." And my mind was blown. You had no idea what I was going to be like as a team member. You definitely had no idea what I was going to be like as a working mother. So even though Nalen had just accepted a job in another city and we knew he'd have to spend time away from this new family unit we were building in Cape Town, your words really stuck with me. And we made the conscious choice as a family. We anointed Jackhammer the place for us to grow our family. And albeit that the other MD had taken the choice out of my hands at that particular moment, I still felt I had agency. I still had options, and I would choose Jackhammer again and again. And I think now it's so easy for me to dismiss that other MD with no small amount of vitriol, I won't lie. But actually, he was doing what so many others probably would have done and still would do, let's be honest. So I wanted you to tell everybody what it was that made you react in a polar opposite way to that guy.
It was an instant knee-jerk reaction, but I'm not sure that I would have had the same approach had I not had 2 babies of my own. My children were quite young at the time. I think pre-kids, I might have had a similar response to the guy who let you down or retracted his offer. And what shifted for me was the practical experience, the lived experience of, particularly when I'd had my second baby. It was 2009. And it was a global financial crisis. And I think maybe 4 weeks after giving birth, I realized that the business was at serious risk. And I needed to go into the office because we didn't have Zoom and I couldn't work remotely. And the only way to just keep things alive was actually to get in there and get on the phone and do my thing. And so I took the baby with me. And fortunately, I did have some help at the office. My Connie, some of you will know, she really did help me. But I figured out how to literally work and have the baby with me and try to figure out how to juggle all the balls literally in the same physical space at the same time. And it was hard, but there was absolutely no moment where I was thinking to myself, oh, I'm going to be less excellent or perform at a reduced level because I've just given birth. It was a bit about the relentlessness of needing to just function at that time. And it was a crisis moment. But I thought to myself, you know something, I'm not that special. If I could have done it, and yes, with help, if I could have done it, so could everybody. And then the other thing is that time, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So just don't get me wrong. I'm not asking anybody to come into the office prematurely. In fact, quite the opposite. I would absolutely wish that everybody has proper time to spend with their newborn. But the watershed moment for me was that I realized that I got a new appreciation for, first of all, how quickly the time passes and how precious it is. So I absolutely would want every mother to spend that time, but also that time passes quickly. And so I knew that you would start training, and then you'd go on maternity leave and you'd spend your 4 months and, spend time with your baby, and then you come back and then you would be here for a long time. And that was probably one of my best decisions ever. So that's a little bit about the moment, but the frame of mind, and I think the mindset that actually grew and evolved from there, was that from a mindset point of view, I continually wanted to be able to be whole and present with my baby, with my kids, with my family, not hide them in the background, not feel like I had to make excuses, be completely open when I got to go and do the doctor and the vaccinations and take time out. And I didn't want to hide that. I wanted to be able to celebrate that. And I think that's partly the evolved sort of culture that we managed to really creep in as part of an intrinsic fabric to the culture that we developed. Back to you, Advaita.
Well, I mean, I think not to open up the membership to our Mutual Appreciation Society too early, right. But I think, that really obviously laid the groundwork of us being so family first, and it's so normalized for us. As you know, Avian, my third child, is a pure lockdown baby. He was born 3 weeks before we went into hard lockdown. And similar to you, we were in a crisis, a global crisis, and it had to be all hands on deck for the survival of our business. But that didn't, me being at work wasn't to the detriment of this newborn I had at home, because I was able to prioritize both in ways that made sense for me at the time and made sense for our family and our work family. And in preparation for the session, actually, I chatted to a few of my close friends to ask them where their companies are succeeding and where they're still falling short. And just to focus a little bit on the challenges for now, but I heard things like my do not disturb hours are encroached upon. Projects aren't distributed fairly. It seems like working mothers are overlooked for promotions because managers assume we won't be able to take them on. Or my manager talks about balance, but at the end of the day, it's all smoke and mirrors. And I know, we all have, but you especially have been reading up a lot of global research on this. Am I over-indexing here? Is this very specific group of my friends feeling these things in isolation, or does the data support what they're saying?
So absolutely. I am also really on top of the particularly things from the US side, because that's the world that I immersed in. For those of you who don't actually work for us, I work in Los Angeles. So I'm actually zooming in from Manhattan Beach, which is on the West Coast. It is 6:22 a.m. So I am really immersed in what's happening in the US culture and world and work world. And that is definitely not unique to one sort of small microcosm of your network. This is a really, I think it's a Western culture situation, but in the US, there are so many not amazing workplaces for women. There are a few key points. First of all, I only discovered relatively recently that paid maternity leave was not legislated in the US. And so it was only relatively recent in American history, American labor law, where you needed to actually give leave. So it's legislated that women can take leave, but then it's not required that companies actually pay them. And so parental leave benefits are considered a privilege and a luxury. I follow a woman by the name of Reshma Saujani. You find her on LinkedIn. She's really amazing, or on Instagram. She is a huge gender equality activist. She's CEO of Girls Who Code, and she's recently written a book called Pay Up, It's also really interesting on gender pay equity. But she writes a lot about the issues around working mothers. And by the way, that term working mothers, let me just put a pin in that for a second, because all mothers work, okay? So I prefer the term career mothers or career moms, but we'll use those interchangeably. Back to Reshma. She just wrote an article in Vogue magazine, actually, which quoted some Wall Street Journal data that is right now the snapshot in the US economy is that due to the tightening of the US economy is that there's been a significant reduction in even the companies that were paying maternity benefits. That has reduced significantly, like in the last 3 months. Can you imagine that? I speak to many women, this is anecdotal, but I speak to many women who are in their sort of like early 30s, aside from the fact that a lot of them are having to like freeze their eggs or trying to freeze their eggs because they don't know when they're going to be able to do the baby thing. They started to think about things like, oh, I've got to stride ahead. I'm going for my last big promotion because I eventually want to have kids. It's like the time is coming. And this idea that they know that there's this almost certainty that their careers are going to plateau if once they have children. It's almost like women with babies in America are seen as a corporate inconvenience. And there's an almost certainty that that their careers are just going to, if not nosedive, they're just going to stagnate for a while. And then the other piece of data, because I've been just doing so much work in hybrid work solutions, is also from Reshma's book, Pay Up. She quotes a stat that I hadn't seen anywhere else, which says that there's a 50% reduced likelihood of promotion for people who choose to work remotely. Now, that's men or women. But what we know is that mostly women are choosing to take remote or hybrid work. And even when the options are to come back into the office, they are choosing to stay more remote because for two reasons. The one is they've got probably the greater burden of domestic responsibility. And also, and this is what we know from our world anecdotally in our company, for the first time, there's been this moment in time where we've had flexibility, more flexibility than ever. And we've been able to show up being the kinds of mothers that we want to be. I was speaking to somebody the other day at DSTV, and they've just been all hauled back 5 days a week, like the pandemic never happened. And she said the biggest, like, sort of heart moment for her was that she can't pick her kid up from school anymore. And I just thought to myself, oh my goodness, that one thing that made her feel like she was showing up in a way for her kids that she'd wanted to, just being able to fetch her kids from school. And that was now taken away because she just had to stay at the office till 5. That like really hit me a lot. So those are just some sort of high level US centric viewpoints, which I know is in the South African, many countries all over the world from a both data and anecdotal data point of view. So I think what we need to talk about is we know that it's shit for a lot of people.
I actually just wanted to say it's so interesting. It's this unconscious bias that hasn't been articulated before, this assumption that mothers can't be great at both roles, the mothering and the working. And we need to really highlight the so-called dichotomy of good worker versus good mother. Like all unconscious biases, they need to be spoken out loud. We need to raise this awareness that these things aren't mutually exclusive.
Yeah, let's just start there with unconscious bias, because I think we have spent so much time thinking about unconscious bias in relation to race, in relation to gender, and even in relation to now there's a lot of ageist bias that we have. But I don't know that the spotlight has been put on unconscious bias towards working parents. And once again, I know we've been very heteronormative in our language here and very generalist. Let's not exclude men from the conversation. But by and large, the unconscious bias against working moms, and the thing about anything unconscious, any kind of prejudice that you have, the moment that you shine the light on it, it's once you see it, it's been seen. And so I think as we start raising our awareness and as we start spreading awareness, it can no longer be unconscious. So I really want to use opportunities like these, as well as content that we create, as well as sharing with the other amazing, unbelievably capable, proficient women in the workplace, to start continuing to raise awareness and share the message around this. I mean, they're examples on their own, but I really want that to be like, why shouldn't that be added to the list of all the other unconscious biases that we're working on? So put it on the list. I think the other thing is that I feel that women leaders, particularly working moms in leadership roles, really need to become role models in this particular thing. I know there's a lot of burden in all the role modeling that we need to do. And like, do we need one more thing to actually add to the bloody long list of things that we are role modeling for all the people? But this is an important thing. And most of our environments are still very male dominated. And even, though they have kids, as I said, they may, particularly if they're sitting at an executive level, probably got a whole host of people who are taking the burden of the domestic responsibilities. And so as working moms, we've got to be the ones in leadership roles, we've got to be the ones to normalize and to role model what it looks like to be able to not hide our families in the background, to actually be family first, to not feel like we need to be making excuses. I mean, I love the fact that we'll get a message from somebody in the team that says, I'm going to the parade, or I'm going to the gala, or in fact, sometimes, I mean, we just got a message today from one of the team members who I know she's just had so much on her plate with her kids. And she sent a message today to say, I'm off tomorrow, I'm taking me time. And that for me was just like, yes, to have an environment where we can be sharing the celebrations and the chaos, because it gets chaotic. We all know that. That needs to be role modeled from the top. We know that culture, creating amazing culture of any sort, if your leaders at the top aren't starting with the message, it's really hard to inculcate that anywhere else. So there is an onus of responsibility on women in leadership roles to be driving this as an agenda item, to really be thinking about it consciously. Okay, back to you on some practicalities, because I know you want to talk about this.
I love the practicalities, but I actually just wanted to say, I think the thing about talking about parenting, Reshma Sajani calls it collectively parenting loudly. And I love that, because for me, it means, bringing the kids into the workplace, and not necessarily physically, but conceptually. And you bring your whole self. And this is how we normalize that we are simultaneously workers and mothers. One role doesn't preclude the other. And I also like the thing about, we can't just be forgiving of the time out for looking after sick kids or other family emergencies. Working parents do need to prioritize the fun things like the cricket matches, because nobody is doing their best work if they're distracted or stressed. And if the timeout lends itself to superlative work delivery, why wouldn't we do more of that? So I think those are the high level points. But I think just on the practical things, it sounds insurmountable. It's a whole lot of policy that needs to go in, and it needs to come from the top, and it absolutely does. But there's so many tangible things that companies can do. Build a breastfeeding room, have childcare in the building. Implement and respect the do not disturb hours. One of my friends said that every January, the management at her company sends out a memo that says, parents are going to be a little bit less available over the next few weeks because school is starting again. They're buying uniforms, they're covering school books, they're adapting to a new sports timetable. So just cut them a little bit of slack. Nothing is going to fall apart. And at that same company, they also have a Slack channel that's dedicated to parenting issues, which I just love. It's, parents can discuss anything from teething remedies to healthy lunchbox ideas to teenagers who want to get nose piercings. And, just like that comment about collectively parenting loudly, it's a way of building community for parents in the workplace, letting them know that they're not running this gauntlet alone, because I think there's nothing more isolating than thinking that I am alone in this drama and this joy that is parenting while working, but actually we're not alone.
These are such great practical examples, because ultimately, if we talk about culture, what is culture? Culture is the way we do things around here. And so once again, you can talk about, yes, we have a very flexible policy for parents, but if in fact, every time, somebody who has maybe got a sick kid is saying, I'm sorry, I need to take, sorry. And the usual sentence is, sorry, I need to take time to go to the doctor. And then the response on the other side is the heave of the sigh and the rolling eyes. Oh, sick kids again. So that becomes part of the culture, where that is, once again, the corporate inconvenience. So for companies who are consciously, intentionally looking to really harness, embrace the idea of creating amazing workplace for working moms, for career moms, we have to look at the practicalities. We have to look at what are the rituals, not just the attitudes, because the attitudes are really key and important, but what are the things that we're doing around here that point to our values, that essentially create the culture. And so it's partly leadership, it's partly attitude, it's partly the practicalities. And all of us in our working environments, regardless of whether you're at leadership or not, have an opportunity to start the narrative. If it's not there already, who do you speak to? How can you be an activist? And we're not talking about an activist like standing on a soapbox. The activist can just be to start the conversation, to start a Slack group or a WhatsApp group, to have a conversation with another working parent, to start asking questions. So everybody has an opportunity to influence their own environments. We happen to be, in our world, quite lucky, I think. And honestly, I don't know that without having kids of my own and experiencing, oh my God, by the way, my teenager just got a nose piercing, like speaking of that 2 weeks ago.
I'm sorry, we didn't have a Slack channel set up for you.
And that's the thing. I love sending the photographs of my kids to the whole company because I want to celebrate my joys. And I think that when you're in an environment where you can celebrate the joys with your kids to your peers, there's something really magical that happens. It shouldn't be unique. It shouldn't be so special. We happen to have something special, but it shouldn't be like that. I would hope that if in 6 months or a year, we convene again and have conversations around what are the shifts that are making, each one of us has an opportunity to actually influence the environments that we're in. So for those of you who don't work at Jackhammer who are on this call, what are you going to do tomorrow or next week to further impact your environment for the better? Because you do have agency and you can make an impact. So I'm going to put the challenge out to everybody else out here. And we're constantly looking to improve. So Jackheads, if there's more that we can be doing, I want to know about it. If there's stuff that we've, gotten blasé about, I want to get out of the comfort zone so we can up the ante. So thank you all very much. We did start a little bit late. We had very grand ambitions around LinkedIn Live, but that didn't work. But we made a plan because we're resourceful like that. So thank you so very much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for hanging around all the way to the end. It would mean the world if you would rate and review on Work and Revolution on your favorite listening app. It helps people know that the show is worth listening to, and so I'll really appreciate that. Thank you so much.